9/11 reports are at the least inaccurate, and at the worst fabricated to really their physics is not possible, and the rules of physics are clearly listed here by 100 different people with doctorates and master's degrees in engineering and metallurgy and all of this stuff. It's all covered in this great piece. In fact, it's very nice to know that my friend Wayne, fellow Connecticut resident, who lives only a few miles from me in Simsbury, Connecticut, has gotten some press on this, and of course they put their whitewashing spin on it with their censorship, which is unbelievable. But you can look and go on yesterday's, the September 9th Hartford Courant. He's got an article in there, and this is the article right here, where it's called "Truthers Still Don't Buy How Towers Came Down." That's the title of the article. Again, it's just trying to demonize the movement. But it did get some press, which is very important. And you know, there are 1,600 licensed professionals who have signed on to the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, a California-based group that believes the Trade Center buildings were brought down by a controlled demolition. Now, he's a very interesting gentleman. I'll let you speak about his own awakening to how things are happening, and then I'll show some excerpts from the film that is yet to be released.
I was a reluctant believer in the official story for many years, and over the years I kept hearing funny things, and I said, well, I gotta wait for the explanation for what happened, and it never came out. I had the opportunity to go to Northampton to see a DVD presented by Richard Gage, founder of Architects Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and he was going to talk about how the buildings were built, and I had wanted to hear an architect talk about these buildings. And in fact, what he talked about largely was a little bit about how the buildings were built, but mostly about how they came down and how the official story didn't fit, and a lot about this thing called Building 7. And so over the next couple of years, I got more and more involved and started to research this, and it became more and more clear that something was really amiss. This is a story that I was not expecting to play such a large role in trying to get the story out. It was quite an amazing revelation to realize that these buildings were in fact destroyed by controlled demolition. I never could have imagined such a thing happening, but the evidence is overwhelming, and so I'm very sympathetic to those that are out there who are in disbelief about what actually happened. What we have found with many of our architects and engineers who have signed the petition and viewed the evidence is that they'll say, wow, I never saw this, I never looked, I never noticed, I took what we were told at face value. First of all, in any good investigation you ask, architects and engineers doesn't discuss who did it or why.
Who benefits?
Because in fact we don't know. And I think it's going to, when the full story comes out, it's going to make a Tom Clancy novel seem like Tom and or Dick and Jane go to the store, right? It's going to be a really big complicated story. So we don't know. We can't tell you who did it. There are people that you would ask. You would ask specific questions to a couple of people. One is the building owner. He owned Building 7, Larry Silverstein Properties. He owned Building 7, about $100 million value. He took out 99-year leases, took control of the Twin Towers. He took control July 2001, 60 days before the event. He could have put a new security team in there. They could have given out badges to anybody they wanted. They could have done anything. He took out insurance policies to protect them against exactly what was going to happen. And he walked away with $5.6 billion in insurance money and has not been asked any hard questions in a rigorous legal format about any of that. He was given a great pass.
What about him on the news the next day telling everyone that the fire department blew up Building 7?
Well, I mean, there are there's many questions to be asked, and you know, he's got his own weasel words. He was coached on weasel words to say afterwards. But in fact, he should be asked a lot more questions, and people on his staff should be asked a lot more questions. We think one of the things Architects and Engineers has done as part of the 10th anniversary events that this is part of, is to write letters to legal and law enforcement, go talk to your local cops, your local police chief, and district attorneys. And so we've got the letters, they're up on our website under the 10th anniversary. Just go to the 10th anniversary events, go behind click on the gray button on the top left. And so we got these letters to legal and law enforcement, and we're hoping that by approaching the police, there will be district attorneys like Jim Garrison who independently start a grand jury investigation that leads to a criminal indictment against somebody. Jim Garrison was from Louisiana, I believe, and of course Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, and but they created a great legal record, there are many victims of 9/11, and it was pointed out by one of the attorneys who also spoke in front of the county courthouse in Hartford a few days ago, that everybody who has a business here has an insurance policy, and there's a specific line item basically for terrorism insurance. And so everyone's paying this, and it's basically based on what I believe the evidence is that it's insurance fraud. And so that's a crime that should be pursued. So, but go ahead.
They also got a war out of that too, right?
There's war. I mean, there's all kinds of other things that have flown out.
Lots of key bono.
There's a lot of stuff that's flown out of, flowed from the events of September 11th.
Patriot Act.
The list that goes on, and the media barrage has been so strong and so uniform that we've completely missed, most people have missed the fact that there is another story. And those that have been astounded by the silence of the voices of people who have been speaking out. What you're going to see are 43 architects, engineers, chemists, physicists, many structural engineers, family members, and at the end, the most important part, I think, is a psychiatrist and psychologist and therapist talking about the reason it's so difficult to get this message through to people, the trauma that we all went through.
September 11th, 2001, a day that changed history. 4 planes went silent and off course. 2 of those planes crashed into the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Several columns were severed, and the jet fuel ignited fires that spread over several floors. About an hour later, millions watched in shock as both towers were suddenly and rapidly destroyed, killing almost 3,000 people, for whom truth and justice may have yet to be served. Hi, I'm Richard Gage, AIA, licensed architect of over 20 years and member of the American Institute of Architects. I'm founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, a non-profit organization of well over 1,000 technical and building professionals. According to official government reports, the fires weakened the structural steel framing of both twin towers, leading to sudden, progressive, and total collapses. Unknown to most people, a third steel frame high-rise, World Trade Center 7, was also destroyed. Critical questions have been raised by more than 1,500 architects and engineers about the official explanations for the destruction of all 3 of these buildings. Along with more than 10,000 other concerned individuals, these professionals, collectively comprising more than 25,000 years of experience, have signed our petition. They're calling for a new investigation into the destruction of these 3 World Trade Center high-rises. This call is based on evidence that reveals a very different destruction scenario than reported by government engineers. This includes abundant scientific forensic data and eyewitness testimony that was omitted from the official reports. You'll be seeing this evidence and hearing from dozens of these technical experts, including many who are among the top in their respective fields. We at AE 9/11 Truth are inspired by President Obama's affirmation to the American people in his inaugural address. How do we accomplish this? We've done our best to fulfill the President's vision by using the scientific method, examining the evidence from the World Trade Center and developing unbiased conclusions from unbiased experts in their fields. Listen to the President provide his account of the pervasive political abuse of science.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
As coherent sets of scientific facts are brought into focus by the experts, the data, and the witnesses in this film, you'll come to a much greater understanding of the events of 9/11 and will be in a position to draw your own informed conclusions. Also, psychologists, therapists, and counselors, along with theologian David Ray Griffin, who have a deep understanding of the personal issues associated with 9/11, will explain why it is so difficult for us to come to terms with the reality of these events, and learn how we can help ourselves and others with this difficult yet vital responsibility. Of course, the ones still most affected by the events of that tragic day are the family members of the victims lost on 9/11. Several have asked to appear in this documentary. Although our focus will be primarily technical, we are deeply moved and honored to give them the opportunity to speak directly to you. Now, let's hear from the AE 9/11 Truth professional petition signers, who will share with you what conclusions they came to. Among these experts are high-rise architects and engineers in the fields of structural design, materials science, chemistry, fire protection, metallurgy, as well as physicists, explosives experts, and demolition technicians. Joining them will be firefighters and 9/11 victims' family members who support our call for a new World Trade Center investigation. Now, let's hear from the AE 9/11 Truth professional petition signers, who will share with you what conclusions they came to. Among these experts are high-rise architects and engineers in the fields of structural design, materials science, chemistry, fire protection, metallurgy, as well as physicists, explosives experts, and demolition technicians. Joining them will be firefighters who support our call for a new World Trade Center investigation.
I don't want to be involved in conspiracy theories. There are lots of them. They can go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
My name is Joel Miller, and I have a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Temple University in Philadelphia. And while I was there in Philadelphia, I worked for two firms on a couple of high-rise buildings. The 13-story Federal Detention Center for Ewing Cole, Cherry, and Broad. I spent about 2 years on that project, and then a year on a high-rise dormitory, about 15 stories for MGA Partners. If we are to believe that fire brought down 3 buildings on the same day on 9/11, that's very troubling for all of us in the design professions. Architects, engineers, even physicists. I'm incredulous that this could have happened, and very troubled by the implications of this possibility. There are thousands of high-rise buildings in the United States, and more being built every day in this country and abroad. As architects and engineers, we have a responsibility to protect people that are users of buildings.
The new World Trade Center, Building 7, looms above the site of its original. Building 7 was a 47-story high-rise, not hit by an airplane. Yet, it was the third modern steel-frame skyscraper to collapse rapidly and symmetrically on 9/11. It was a football field away from the North Tower and sustained minor damage from the falling debris. Building 7's precipitous collapse was blamed on normal office fires.
I'm Kamal Obeid. I have a master's degree in civil and structural engineering from the University of California at Berkeley. I've been a practicing engineer for the last 30 years. Building 7 to me is really what gives it away, because that's a classic case of controlled demolition.
My name is Stephen Dustwald. I'm a licensed professional structural engineer with 37 years of experience in the structural field. I have 25 years of experience as owner and principal of my own structural engineering firm here in Las Vegas. I have focused on nuclear power plant design, large commercial and industrial buildings. I first became aware of the problems with the official account of the collapse when I saw a DVD online from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. They pointed out various problems with the official story, and the ones that caught my attention were the rapid failure of the connections in order for the building to come down at the rate that it did.
My name is Casey Pfeiffer. I am a registered professional structural engineer in San Diego, California. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering at the University of Notre Dame. I have been practicing engineering for 15 years, and currently I am the principal of Pacific Coast Structural Engineering in San Diego, California. A friend of mine gave me a Blueprint for 9/11 Truth DVD to review, and from that, the evidence that I saw was so compelling that it became obvious that the official story was not correct.
I'm William Bryce. I worked for one of the nation's largest design-build construction firms on commercial and industrial and institutional projects in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore areas. As a professor, taught engineering materials, structures lab, and other building-related courses at Vermont Technical College to architectural engineering students for 20 years. I watched Building 7 fall at an accelerating rate in 6.5 seconds. This was a massive 47-story structure. The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
My name is David Topete. I have a Master's of Science degree in civil engineering. I am a licensed structural engineer. I design new structures and retrofit existing structures from concrete or masonry or structural steel. In my professional opinion, in my experience, for World Trade Center 7 to collapse straight down upon itself, as video indicates, as everything that we've witnessed, the supports at the center essentially all had to be taken out at once. I certainly believe that it had to have been controlled demolition, controlled charges, explosives, something of that type, because it was a sudden failure.
I'm Dr. Bob Bowman, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. Flew 101 combat missions in Vietnam, directed all the Star Wars programs under Presidents Ford and Carter. My PhD is in aeronautics and nuclear engineering from Caltech. I did postdoctoral work at the Von Karman Institute in Brussels, Belgium, in finite element analysis. I taught at 5 universities and colleges, serving as department head and assistant dean. The coup de grace for me was when I found out that Building 7 had collapsed later that day. And when I saw Building 7 come down, to me, Building 7, the fact that it looks like a perfect controlled demolition of an intact building with no visible fires. I mean, that's what I call a smoking gun.
My name is Robert McCoy. I'm an architect. I have a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of California in Berkeley in 1963. Been licensed in California since about 1964. From about 1965 until about 1985, most of my experience has been in high-rise, multi-story steel buildings. NIST would have us to believe that these was a typical office fire, scattered office fires, if you will, that brought this building down. Since the mid-60s, I've tried to follow high-rise fires because they're something we worry a lot about as we design these buildings. And I'm not aware of any high-rise building that have come down as a result of fires. I can't remember even a partial collapse in any of these buildings that I've watched over the years.
I'm Steve Barish, founder and president of Barish Architects and Associates, Inc., a 33-year-old architecture, planning, and engineering firm. We have offices in San Luis Obispo and Pasadena, California. I hold a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Arizona and a Master's of Architecture and Urban Design from Rice University in Houston, Texas. Spent 3 years in London as the first PhD student at the Architectural Association. One of the things that really interested me is how quickly the Tower 7 fell. It fell within 7 seconds approximately from top to bottom. This building was built in the mid-'80s apparently and met all the known codes at the time. Buildings just don't behave like that.
We're here in Sydney with Jan Utzon, son of the great Jorn Utzon, who designed the Sydney Opera House. What are the features of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 that caused you to be disturbed?
It looked like it was a demolition more than anything else.
My name is Les Young. I'm a licensed architect in both New York State and in California. I've been involved in many large projects, including overseeing several high-rise buildings ranging in size from 14 stories to 40. Over the course of 20 years, I'm mainly called in to help with very large, difficult projects. When I watched Building 7 collapse, it basically left no doubt in my mind that something was wrong. Building 7 had not been hit by a plane. To me, it was obvious that there was some controlled demolition and some explosions involved. Was the structural steel from World Trade Center 7 preserved, documented, analyzed, according to standard procedures for investigating engineering failures?
It was really clear from the beginning that there was this great move to, as quickly as possible, get rid of all of the rubble and move it off.
Because what they did immediately after 9/11 was they started removing the steel, the debris from Tower 7 and all the towers immediately. They sent it off to China to be recycled.
400 truckloads per day of material were taken away from the World Trade Center site and sent to China for recycling.
All of a sudden they had a big incentive to recycle steel for some reason.
Quickly and rapidly, they were destroying the structural steel.
The steel was hauled away and melted down before it could be analyzed.
It was already being carted away and destroyed when the FEMA investigators got there about a month after September 11th.
It was being melted down, it was being cut up into pieces so that no real thorough investigation could happen. And that in itself is a crime, and that kind of thing needs to be investigated.
The steel was picked up and carted away before anybody got a good look at it. And the destruction of evidence was a criminal act in itself. It would have answered a lot of questions that we can't answer because we don't have the structural steel to examine.
There were laws violated in the destruction of that evidence. And for the American Society of Civil Engineers to ignore those events is extremely disturbing and is a violation, in my opinion, of their professional code of ethics.
It was contrary to the way all investigations are done. If an airplane crashes, They seal off the entire area. Nobody touches anything. They move it to a secure location, and they reconstruct an aircraft.
Normally, when you have a structural failure, you carefully go through the debris field, looking at each item, photographing every beam as it collapsed and every column where it is in the ground, and you pick them up very carefully and you look at each element. We were unable to do that in the case of Tower 7.
Aside from this one small piece that was found to have intergranular melting, incredibly, none of the other steel from World Trade Center 7 was saved for analysis. This is disconcerting, considering World Trade Center 7 would have been the first steel-framed high-rise building in history to ostensibly collapse due to fire.
The government has destroyed much of the evidence, but there's still some evidence available and photographs of the evidence.
My name is Lynn Margulis. I've been doing science every day since I was about 16 years old. I teach at the University of Massachusetts. I have a PhD in genetics. I reconstruct the past, natural history, from clues taken to be representational, and that's exactly what we're doing with reconstructing of why the buildings were destroyed in 9/11. In historical science, that's what must be done. In 1999, I was a recipient of the President's Medal of Science from Clinton, and I received the Da Vinci Award, that is the membership in the Da Vinci Society. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science. So the claim is that it's something else. It's trying to prove preconceived ideas.
Was a proper investigation performed that might have revealed the use of accelerants or explosives in World Trade Center 7's destruction?
My name is Stephen Jones, a physicist. I received my PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University in 1978, so I've been at this for over 30 years, studying various subjects. I have published over 50 peer-reviewed papers in my career. NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
The World Trade Center 7 building reminds me of the Meridian Bank building in some ways in Philadelphia. The Meridian Bank building is a 38-story skyscraper that burned for 18 hours in 1991, suffered extensive damage from the fire, but did not collapse.
I am Dan Barnum, FAIA, a graduate architect from Rice University with a Bachelor of Architecture degree. For the 40-plus years that I've been practicing architecture, I have designed a variety of buildings from small houses to high-rise office buildings. Some of the high-rises that I've worked on are 1 shell and 2 shell here in Houston, and I was project manager for a 22-story office building in Akron, Ohio. I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. I've designed high-rise buildings, and I know what they do in fires because I've studied that. Later in the day, when World Trade Center 7 collapsed, they had already showed us pictures of a few fires in that building, and I mean, they weren't even raging. And how could that cause a building to collapse as if it were imploded? Couldn't happen.
My name is Jonathan Smolens, PE. I'm a professional structural engineer in the Boulder, Denver area for the past 12 years. And one of my specialties is forensic engineering, including evaluation of structures post-disaster. What happened to those columns to all collapse at the same time? The explanation provided does not match the evidence that we have.
My name is Michael Donnelly, PE. I'm a structural engineer with 14 years of experience. I get involved mostly with the design of steel-framed fireproof buildings. We've never had a steel-framed skyscraper collapse in the United States or internationally. So There's no precedent. I don't think Building 7 could have collapsed by fire, as NIST tells us that this collapse mechanism, starting with thermal expansion, that worked its way upward and outward through the building, in a matter of seconds, there's not enough time for the building to collapse the way that NIST tells us it collapsed.
I'm Ed Winiak, licensed fire protection engineer for at least 25 years, and I work for a number of organizations, city, federal, large insurance companies, consultant, always in the area of fire safety, and with the goal of keeping the public safe and first responders safe. I became fascinated with the government's version of the events on 9/11, because this was totally contrary to everything that I've ever experienced, either working in the field of fire safety or knowing what I know about mechanical engineering. It defies many fundamentals of mechanics and materials and physics and just many fundamental engineering concepts.
World Trade Center 7, NIST claims the fires were very large, very hot, and long-lasting, when in reality, observation, which has been researched by many people, shows these fires did not last very long. They were not in the locations where NIST claims they were at given times.
According to lead investigator Shyam Sunder of the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, World Trade Center 7 collapsed at freefall acceleration for more than 100 feet of its fall. What does the speed of the collapse reveal to us?
Essentially, in less than 7 seconds, Tower 7 came down upon itself.
Building 7, NIST reports admits fell at the rate of gravity for the first 100 feet. Well, that's impossible unless there's nothing resisting it.
It's just like taking your car keys out and just dropping them. That's how fast the building came down, for over 100 feet. And the only way you can get that is when there's zero resistance. And so what we're looking at is a building just coming straight down, falling right through itself with zero resistance. Buildings don't have zero resistance, which is why you feel comfortable walking into a building.
A building cannot do free fall with a huge steel structural system in place to support it without it being blown up. That's the only way it could come down at free fall.
The failure of all these connections as the primary means of structural failure is inconsistent with a natural gravitational collapse, and indicates the presence of other agents which would dismember these connections.
I'm David Chandler. I have a bachelor's degree in physics from Harvey Mudd College and a master's in education from Claremont Graduate University and another master's in mathematics from California Polytechnic University. I've been teaching for over 30 years. I'd heard people say, well, it came down at free fall or close to free fall and so forth, so I decided I'd measure it myself. I have a tool that I use in teaching, which allowed me to take a video and put a dot on each frame to follow the motion of things. And so you can measure speeds and accelerations, and it'll do the analysis. One of the fundamental laws of nature is the conservation of energy. In order for it to be falling down with zero resistance, it means that resistance had to have been removed by something else.
Now, NIST claims that the columns were buckling in the first several seconds before the free fall occurred. Now, I don't see how that's possible.
And in the final report, they modified it, they tried to doctor it up. They still tried to say that it was essentially correct, but then they modified it, and they actually admitted there was a period of free fall involved. But they never changed their model. Like, how do you all of a sudden allow for free fall when they just got done explaining how it couldn't have been in free fall? If I were a scientist, I'd be embarrassed to try to put forward something like that. It was clearly a fraudulent argument.
In other words, NIST is telling us that the building below it ceased to exist for the first few seconds of the collapse of the building. Well, things in physics just don't cease to exist and cease to resist the forces that are on them.
Free falling for 8 stories. So we know that happened. Okay, so it's been measured and it's on videos. Everyone can see it. NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories. That's a bothersome part of the puzzle because NIST never explained it.
Absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
The building didn't disappear so the building can fall for 100 feet at free fall speed. That's impossible. That's a violation of the fundamental law of physics that says that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So that evidence alone would indicate that the official story doesn't hold water.
The exterior of the NIST World Trade Center 7 computer simulation model, which they put together to try to explain their theory, shows large, very large deformations which are not observed in the video of the actual event. Yet they don't attempt to explain this in the report on why their model doesn't represent or replicate reality. What's actually happening with the NIST computer model, it's behaving like a natural collapse would. It would be deforming the exterior of the building if the whole interior was collapsing prior to the exterior. What we're seeing is what would happen in a natural collapse, and what we see on the real video is not a natural collapse.
So I think that the NIST model is flawed. Of course, they won't release all of their parameters that they use to model the collapse, and that is a primary problem for them.
NIST has also repeatedly refused to release computer input data that was requested through the Freedom of Information Act from them in the past concerning World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7.
What do these professionals conclude about the destruction of World Trade Center Building 7?
There had to be some agent that was destroying the connections in building number 7 at 400 connections per second, and the only thing that I can see that would be capable of doing this would be explosive devices at the connections. And this is why I think that there has to be a new investigation to find out the real physical causes for all these members to act in an atypical fashion.
And I certainly believe that it had to have been controlled demolition, controlled charges, explosives, something of that type, because it was a sudden failure.
Controlled demolition. There's no way that fire did what they said it did to that building. Impossible. Couldn't happen. It just did not make sense that a building that had a few minor fires in it could possibly succumb the way it did. If there was damage, it would have been minor. There might have been some deflection of a beam or two here or there, but not a total and unequivocal complete collapse. It just doesn't ring true.
A few fires in that building, and I mean, they weren't even raging. And how could that cause a building to collapse as if it were imploded? Couldn't happen.
To me, it was obvious that there was some controlled demolition and some explosions involved.
When I saw Building 7 fall, it to me appeared to be controlled demolition because it fell in free fall manner into itself. It is my opinion, as a former 12 Bravo combat engineer, well trained in the use of explosives, that this building, all 3 buildings, were brought down as a result of controlled demolitions.
This is the original site of the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Construction is now underway where dramatic new facilities are being erected. Just 10 years ago, the planes hit the towers, cutting through some exterior and interior supporting structural steel columns. The fuel from the planes ignited office fires across several floors. According to the official reports, the structural steel frame was weakened and failed, causing a total progressive collapse of each tower. Does the official explanation make sense? Was there a comprehensive investigation that examined all of the evidence? Let's look at the details.
These buildings were designed to take multiple impacts from airliners.
I walked into the office, and the first words that I heard was a plane's just run into the World Trade Center. And my initial thought was, well, that's okay. It's built to withstand a 707.
He stated that the fuel would be dumped into the building, but the building would still be there, although most of the fuel blew out the opposite side of the building.
These buildings are built to handle several times the load above them. Those perimeter columns could handle 5 times the load above them, and the core columns could handle 3 times the load above them.
The majority of the jet fuel was burnt up instantly in the big fireball, and it was gone. The fires that were left were office furnishings and carpet and things like that. A lot of things in these kind of buildings have to be fire resistant by nature. It's required by code. So there really isn't a whole lot of fuel in there to begin with.
The media portrayed these fires as being extremely hot, but the fires were not that hot in World Trade Center 1 and 2. If you look at the NIST zone data, you can see this. And to use our own powers of observation, you could tell by seeing these fires and seeing black smoke come out the windows, that means that the fires were oxygen starved and it was incomplete combustion. And so it was a low temperature fire.
I am Robert Podolsky. I have a master's degree in theoretical physics from Xavier University in Cincinnati. I worked for 10 years as a professional physicist, engineer, systems analyst for government and for industry. Companies like Avco, GE, Bendix, and also Air Force Avionics Lab and the Coast Guard Electronics Division. I looked up in a manual the burning temperature of jet fuel and found that under the conditions that existed at the World Trade Center on 9/11, that jet fuel had to have been burning at about 750 degrees Fahrenheit. I also noticed that the official explanation of what happened there was that the heat from the fire supposedly softened the steel and thereby brought the buildings down. If you have a flame at 750 degrees, you can hold that flame under a steel beam forever, and you'll never reach a high enough temperature to bend steel, let alone melt it. So immediately I knew at that point that the official explanation was dead wrong. There was no way those flames could have possibly brought about the collapse of the building.
It did not seem possible that these towers that were designed to withstand the impact of a 707 could possibly collapse in such a short order of time from the time that they were hit. There's no way the building was designed to take the impact of one, if not more, multiple airplanes. They were designed to withstand hurricane force winds of up to 140 miles an hour.
My first reaction was, that looks like controlled demolitions. However, I believed the official story because it was played to me over and over again. I heard repeated experts telling me that this was terrorists that did this and that it was planes that brought those buildings down. So I accepted the official story.
The NIST testing of the Twin Tower floor assemblies done at Underwriters Laboratories. This was done per ASTM E119 in a 2-hour, 2,000-degree fire test. During the test, the main trusses sagged approximately 4 inches after 60 minutes and 6 inches after 100 minutes. Yet NIST had the main trusses sagging well over 40 inches in their models.
Rather than a slow groaning collapse that we might anticipate, the Twin Towers show in the videos a very rapid, sudden onset of destruction. What does this imply?
I'm Frank Cullinan, a practicing civil engineer in the state of California. I have a Bachelor of Science from Chico State, which I received in 1988. I've been a licensed civil engineer since 1993. I specialize in bridge construction, retaining wall construction, small building construction, bridge demolition, and I have experience in bridge design and building design. Structural steel is required by building and design codes to prevent catastrophic failure and loss of public life. Everybody's seen the building collapses on 9/11, and it was shocking how fast the buildings collapsed.
The way the buildings fell was not indicative of the way a building that's in distress collapses.
This doesn't happen with structural steel buildings and never has and never will again. We assume that fires could destroy a building. Why people select steel buildings is because they would destroy slowly. It would gradually twist and bend and give people plenty of time and safety in getting out of the building.
The basic philosophy of the building codes in the last 75 to 80 years has been to ensure ductile failure of the members to provide for the public safety. Under this philosophy, members that are overloaded will deform elastically within the elastic range of the material with increasingly large deformations and deflections. This gives rise to large deformations that are visible and apparent to the occupants of the structure. And this gives them time to evacuate the structure.
I would not have expected the whole building to just give in at once, and I thought it rather odd that they fell almost perfectly in very similar ways. It seemed odd that lightning would strike twice.
Upon further review of the videos of the tower's destruction in the 9/11 Blueprint for Truth DVD, I was surprised to see the upper floors of the North Tower, the upper 15 floors of the North Tower, implode prior to any destruction of the tower below, because it would be logical that as a result of the plane crash that the upper 15 floors would start to damage the floors below, not the floors above.
And it certainly would stay in the damage zone. It would not drop down through 80,000 ton of insulated, undamaged structural steel and do it in 12 seconds.
I discuss this claim that the upper section of each of the towers crushed the lower section. However, when you watch video closely, in the case of World Trade Center 1, you'll see that the upper section disintegrates itself. Its lower stories are breaking up before it even impacts the lower section. It appears to be a controlled demolition of its own of the upper section.
The tops of the buildings were basically disintegrated.
The top section, pushing on the bottom section, it's going to meet equal forces as it goes. Both sections are going to be demolished at the same rate. So by the time you've crushed up 15 stories below it, the top 15 stories are also going to be crushed. And so there's nothing left now to crush the rest of the building. So there's so many paradoxes here. A little tiny chunk of the building can't possibly fall and crush the entire structure below it.
Well, there's demolitions done in France, which use what we call the Vernage technique, where they take out a couple floors worth of columns with hydraulics. They take the columns out and they let the upper section of the building drop 2 full floors. And when it impacts the lower section, there's a very definitive, observable jolt, deceleration, and velocity loss.
You're looking for a jolt, that this thing, if it actually comes down and hits, you should be able to see the point at which they actually impact, because it would actually slow down the motion of the falling block.
And you can see it in the graph. It is not there in the case of the North Tower.
It never slows down. It accelerates the entire time. And that was what was extremely significant. So I published a paper about that. It's in the Journal of 9/11 Studies. And so if you had the top section acting like a pile driver, if in fact it actually hit and made an impact, it was effectively crushing anything, pushing hard on this core structure below it, the core structure is going to push back equally hard. And that's what's going to cause the top section of the building to slow down. But the fact that it's constantly accelerating downward is evidence that it didn't slow down. It's not actually hitting and engaging with the structure below it in any way that could demolish it. The top section is not crushing the bottom section of the building, or it would meet resistance.
I am Richard Gage. I am a retired professional electrical engineer. I went through Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute and received a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering degree in 1954. I worked for Joseph Flooring for 41 years and was Principal Chief Electrical Engineer for the World Trade Center complex. I was very familiar with the Twin Towers elevator systems because we took over conceptual maintenance and improvements of the elevator systems after the project was completed. I actually ran and rode up and down elevator shafts on the top of a car going 1,200 feet a minute. You could imagine the experience. I'm very familiar with the interior structure that surrounded the elevator shafts and the accessibility which the elevator companies had 24/7. The only way that I can see that the towers could have collapsed is that the interior columns were compromised. In Tower 1, unless my eyes were deceiving me, before the tower started collapsing from the top, the antenna started to fall. And the antenna, of course, was over the middle of the elevator shafts. And, of course, their access to the elevator shafts gave them total access to the surrounding core columns, the interior of the core columns.
NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, acknowledges that the towers came down at essentially free-fall acceleration. What are the implications of that admission?
The measurements have indicated that Tower 1 collapsed in about 11 seconds and Tower 2 collapsed in about 9 seconds. And the argument goes that this is essentially the rate at which free fall would happen.
I had a friend that asked me if it was possible for the Twin Towers to achieve near free fall speed when they collapsed.
The Twin Towers could not have come straight down through the thousands of tons of structural steel through the greatest resistance of 80,000 tons of structural steel at the speed of practically free fall. That just would not happen.
There are columns of steel around the exterior of the building and within the core, all of which are there to prevent the thing from falling down. And so even if something falls on it, it's not going to immediately just go pop, 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 pop like that, floor by floor. If it's going to collapse, it's going to have to take some time to weaken the structure below it.
This structure was capable of holding 3 to 5 times the weight. And here it is falling through it with a resistance of only 1/3 of its weight. Roughly 90% of the resistance has been removed. And what's happening is the top section is not crushing down the lower section like a pile driver, which is the picture that NIST basically is painting. It's actually falling into material that's already been pulverized, that's offering very little resistance. It's just coming down through pre-pulverized material. One of the fundamental laws of nature is the conservation of energy.
There was no time for this elastic deformation and plastic deformation, which would have absorbed energy and decreased the descent to less than free fall speed. As energy is drained away from the system to deform those members, it would slow down the descending mass and cause a descent at less than free fall speed.
This is high school physics, and our whole society is being led to believe that these fundamental laws of physics, hard science, don't apply anymore. I think that should really frighten all of us.
These experts in psychology highlight their valuable experience for us as to why this evidence can still be so difficult for people to accept.
At this point, we have 9 years of hard scientific evidence that disproves the government theory about what happened on September 11th, and yet people continue to be either oblivious to the fact that this information exists or completely resistant to looking at this information. So the question becomes why? Why is it that people have so much trouble hearing this information? From my work, I think we would be remiss not to look at the impact of trauma. My name is Marty Hopper, and I'm a PhD clinical psychologist. I've been working and living for the past 30 years here in Boulder, Colorado. For the past 11 years, my work has focused on helping people who have experienced personal trauma. Now, as we know, the horrors of what happened on 9/11 were televised all over the world, and they were televised, in fact, live. We witnessed the deaths of almost 3,000 of our fellow Americans. We know this had a very severe and traumatic impact on a large majority of the population. I myself cried for weeks after September 11th. A friend of mine who is a psychologist in practice here in Boulder said that her caseload increased tremendously after 9/11, and people that she hadn't seen in 10 years were coming back into her practice. So I think it's safe to say that collectively as a nation, because of what happened on September 11th, we experienced trauma.
I'm Fran Schur, and I have a master's degree from the University of Colorado. I've had a private practice as a psychotherapist and as a licensed professional counselor for about 20 years. Why do people resist this information, the information that shows that the official story about 9/11 cannot be true? What I've learned is that as humans, each of us have a worldview, and that worldview is usually formed in great part by the culture we grow up in. When we hear information that contradicts our worldview, social psychologists call the resulting insecurity cognitive dissonance. For example, with 9/11, we have one cognition, which is what the official story of 9/11, what our government told us, what our media repeated to us over and over, that 19 Muslims attacked us. On the other hand, we have what scientists, researchers, architects, engineers are now beginning to tell us, which is that there is evidence that shows that the official story cannot be true. So now we've lost our sense of security. We are starting to feel vulnerable. Now we're confused.
9/11 truth challenges some of our most fundamental beliefs about our government and about our country. When your beliefs are challenged or when two beliefs are inconsistent, cognitive dissonance is created. 9/11 truth challenges the beliefs that our country protects us and keeps us safe and that America is the good guy. My name is Bob Hopper, and I have a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Cincinnati. For the past 29 years, I've been a licensed PhD clinical psychologist in Boulder, Colorado. When your beliefs are challenged, fear and anxiety are created. In response to that, our psychological defenses kick in, and they protect us from these emotions. Denial, which is probably the most primitive psychological defense, is the one most likely to kick in when our beliefs are challenged.
I'm Danielle Dupré, PhD, originally from Switzerland, where I studied psychology and psychoanalysis. For the past 15 years, I've been empowering people who have experienced significant trauma. America is a powerful nation. It has never been attacked. We were confident, we felt secure, and all of a sudden that security collapsed. People started to be fearful. With all those rumors, those news, people didn't know what to think about. And it's a very, very uncomfortable state to be in. And eventually our mind shuts off. Just like when a computer is overloaded, our minds get overloaded. We can't handle it anymore and we shut down. It's easier to deny it and move on with our lives.
And what some of us will tend to do is deny the evidence that's coming our way and stick to the original story, the official story, and to try to regain our equilibrium in that way. Another thing we can do is decide to look at the conflicting evidence and be sincere and be open-minded and look at both sides of the issue and then make up our own mind about what reality is.
I'm Dorothy Lorig. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of Colorado, and I've been practicing reevaluation counseling for over 16 years. If we can think of our worldview as being sort of our mental and emotional home, I think all of us will do just about anything to defend our homes, to defend our families, and so I see that with people, and I saw that with myself when my brother tried to talk with me about it. Don't mess with me, don't mess with my home, don't mess with my comfort with how things are. And about a week later, I read a lengthy article by Professor Griffin about why he believes the official account of 9/11 cannot be true. And it was a very well-researched article. I was in my office at the time. I sat there and I felt my stomach churning. I thought maybe I was going to be sick. And I leaped out of my chair and ran out the door and took a long walk around the block, around several blocks, and just broke down. I understand now that what was happening was my worldview about my government being in some way my protector, almost like a parent, had been dashed, and it was like being cast out into the wilderness, I think is the closest way to describe that feeling. And I sobbed, felt like the ground had completely disappeared beneath my feet. And I knew at some point during the walk that I knew that I was going to have to become active in educating other people about this, that for me to retain any sense of integrity, I was going to have to take some action. I couldn't just let something like this go.
Many people respond to these truths in a very deep way. Some have a visceral reaction like they've been punched in the stomach. To begin to accept the possibility that the government was involved is like opening Pandora's box. If you open the lid and peek in a little bit, it's going to challenge some of your fundamental beliefs about the world.
Well, here are a few of those spontaneous initial reactions to hearing the contradictory evidence about 9/11.
I don't want to know the truth, or I'd become too negative and psychologically go downhill. I'm not sure I want to know. If this is true, then up would be down and down would be up. My life would never be the same.
Fran, I refuse to believe that many Americans could be that treasonous. Someone would have talked. But these are beliefs. They are not scientific facts. But these beliefs do keep us from looking at the empirical evidence. When something like 9/11 happens, we need to be sure that we have a real investigation into who the perpetrators are, and then we need to be sure that those perpetrators are held legally accountable. It's part of the healing process on the individual level as on the collective level. We need the truth in order to heal.
10 years later, the deep wounds from 9/11 have yet to heal. Nothing hits closer to home than the loss that these family members continue to endure, along with the torment of their unanswered questions.
My name's Bob McIlvaine. I'm from right outside the Philadelphia area, and I'm the father of Bobby McIlvaine, who was killed in the lobby of the North Tower on September 11, 2001. But I've been searching to get the truth of exactly what happened to Bobby, and Bobby is a very interesting story. Bobby was one of the first 10 bodies found. We took him home that week. We were one of the few. Well, I finally found the doctor who examined him. He gave me an outline of a body, and he described all the injuries he had. But the fact is that all his injuries were in the face.
Don't assume it was left by accident. If you see something, say something.
They're just giving money to their buddies.
You want to abolish the Federal Reserve? Of course. I don't think that private institutions should have control over a nation's currency.
We need a manufacturing base and then our economy will take off like a rocket again.
A special televised meeting of the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations provides a window to the real story. The speaker, Vice President Dick Cheney, takes a question from David Rockefeller.
Vice President, I just enjoyed so much your whole speech, but I was particularly pleased that you gave such a strong endorsement for the free trade agreement for all the Americas, subject that has been of great concern to me for many years, and particularly recently, and I think it's absolutely essential for the strength of our economy.